Citizen Jane Film Festival. Thanks for coming. With me is Karen Skloss, the director of Sunshine, and also the director of a short called Smitten, which she did as her graduate thesis at UT Austin, which we'll be showing in our shorts program. So we're double booking Karen. She's going to show some of her earlier work, or one piece of her earlier work, which was made in 2001, right? And then Sunshine, which is brand spanking new, and it's her feature directorial debut. So we're very excited to support her as she moves more into directing. But Karen has a really strong background in editing, and that's the focus of this panel. So we'll let her talk about her film that she's showing here, and then talk more about her background as an editor. And if you guys have questions about that complicated and fun process of how a film gets sculpted and put together, this is your chance to ask. So do you want to talk a little bit about Sunshine?
Sunshine?
And
Sure.
just let people know what you're showing here?
Yeah, Sunshine is a feature documentary, and that's sort of what my background in editing had been, was editing all these documentaries. And the thing that sort of brought me to movies was actually like I wanted to be an actress when I was growing up, and I had been like doing all this stuff, and then like going to film school and stuff. In Austin, which is where I live, there's a really strong documentary community, and I just somehow landed in working on all these documentary films. And so after working on them for like 10 years or something, and just being totally consumed with other people's projects, I was like, I have to do one of my own, And so I was just thinking, I was like, well, I never thought I would be a documentary filmmaker, but I had really come to, learn sort of the language of documentary, and I felt really comfortable, like that was something that I could do, with limited resources, and then also just something that I knew a whole lot about, because the movie Sunshine is actually a really personal story about my life being a single mom. And then also, like, as I was writing grants and stuff for it, I started to realize that I wanted to incorporate my biological mother's story, because she went to a home for unwed mothers and had me there and gave me up. And so the whole point of the film was to look at the way that things have changed, between just our two generations in terms of, what's acceptable. And so then I just kind of started on this process. Really, I almost had already started on it, when I had my daughter, because that was like, I was actually pregnant when I was making Smitten, and
I remember reading that.
And I was just like, I couldn't believe that I was pregnant when I was like making my first, narrative or whatever, and so in order to sort of process it, I had started documenting, just my pregnancy, and I figured I would make some crazy experimental film about it, and I wound up making some installations and that kind of stuff. But what it really wound up being was like a 10-year process of shooting footage, and then editing documentaries for other people, and keeping track of my footage, and just continuing to shoot and fundraise, and then finally, like when I got the mother lode of ITVS money, being able to just turn down other work and focus on it and finish it.
So is that hard to put that work aside and work on your own personal work, because you've been?
I was so desperate to finally get to make my own thing. I could always make small things, so I made a lot of like installation pieces and video art pieces, and because that's sort of like manageable. But I had just been really dying to just be able to make all the decisions for myself, and also working for directors and stuff, you sit and you think that always think that what they should do, or I guess I did. And so
the director in you was just waiting to come out.
And I was like, no. But it was actually very educational, because I realized all the things that I didn't know.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about that relationship of director and editor? Because I think for those of us who haven't worked that much in the film industry, like that can be a very different relationship depending on the personalities and the working styles. And
yeah, well, I mean, I've been lucky enough to work almost exclusively with women. I edited a piece for like one guy about dirt track racing, and it was interesting because it was kind of different. Like, you know, working with the women that I've worked with, I think I hate to make generalizations about like working with men or working with women. You know, like that drives me nuts. But you know, I became I became friends with like pretty much every director that I worked with, and
Well, it's such an intimate relationship.
yeah, yeah. Like when I was working with Margaret, you know, and we were like super on deadline. I did one movie for this woman, Margaret Brown, who was actually here last year, and we were on like a crazy, wild deadline, and I was just editing, and then you know, we were talking about like doing our toenails, you know, in the editing room, and then you know, she was like, wouldn't it be crazy if you turned around and I was just putting blush all over my whole face? You know, and then she's crazy. She's really fun. And, you know, so then I was working, and then turned around and that's what she had done. You know? So, I mean, and that's something that, you know, a guy would never do, I guess. So I guess the point of all of that is just that, you know, I think when you're working on any documentary, the process is a little bit different from working on a narrative film, which I haven't done a whole lot of narrative work. Like I've done narrative shorts and stuff, but you know, like as far as like the big long projects, they've all been documentaries, and there's a lot of collaboration that happens in storytelling between a director and an editor on a doc, because you know a lot of times you're working with you know hundreds of hours of footage, and you sort of have an outline, and you know, and a lot of times, you know, what I've learned after doing my own movie is that they're spread very thin, you know, and they can't make every decision. So there's a lot of, you know, kind of crucial and fundamental decisions that editors on docs actually make. And so I think that's the biggest thing. You know?
And depending on what type of documentary you're doing and how
That's
you're
true.
working, I mean, you might be just shooting, you know, hopefully you're not just shooting hundreds of hours, you have an idea.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, you have this huge marble piece and you're trying to sculpt out the story or try to find the story inside that huge stone almost, you know, so you're trying to hack away at what is the story that you're trying to tell, and, you know, so the editor actually is quite a creative force in that. I think that gets overlooked a lot of times.
Yeah, I think it really does, and you know, but I guess I feel like I've been lucky enough that the people that I've worked with really have appreciated it and have it makes for such a fun process.
Mm-hmm.
But it is hard at the end when you're showing the movie and you know nobody cares.
Yeah.
I mean, the director cares, but nobody even
Yeah.
knows who you are, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of why I was like, I want to make my own, you know. So, and I did edit my own film too, which was nuts, but because it was very personal and it was like exercise in masochism. I'm sorry? Oh, well, you know, it's sort of like I didn't really feel like I needed to make a personal movie exactly, and when I was writing grants, I was kind of I wanted to make a movie about the themes. And when I was writing grants, I just kept on gravitating back to like what I knew the best, which was what I knew about the themes. And finally, one of my friends just said once, you know, she was just like, you should just, you know, do your story. And so what that meant was like really facing my own baggage, you know, alone in the editing room in isolation for months and months and months and months. So that was the part that was tough, you know. It's like hard enough just to live through it, but then to like edit it, you know, because you have to go over things over and over and over and over.
Yeah, how many
So-
hours do you think or how, you know, it may be hard to tabulate hours, but how many weeks do you think, or months, or years?
On my film,
Yeah,
or-
that you were editing.
Probably solid like 7 or 8 months,
Mm-hmm.
like full time every day, you know. But it's
So what was the routine like? You get up, make some coffee, go straight to work, and
pretty much, or get up, you know, get my daughter to school, rush on over to the office. And the hardest part about it was that I because I was producing my film and directing it, and we were shooting, and I started editing while we were shooting and stuff. There were always so many loose ends, And a lot of the time I felt like, I only got a couple of hours of editing in a day. And that's the thing that I really, if I did it again, at least I'd have a producer, if not, a co-editor. But, when you're working on a PBS budget, like, it's kind of limiting. And
Right.
I mean, it's wonderful. It's like the best money you can get for documentaries unless you find a benefactor. But, it's still not enough to, like, hire a bunch of people for a non-commercial kind of project, so.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Jump in.
You said that you were writing grants. So there's always a question about the movies. It's like, who funds them?
Right.
Like, because they're extravagant and huge, and they probably cost millions of dollars. I mean, that's the assumption.
Right, yeah.
So, as a director or a writer or someone who wants to create a film, how do you go about funding it?
It just depends on the project, I think. I mean, different projects have their own avenues. And, with mine, I really, I had been making these, like, experimental pieces about the themes that I explored in the film. And, I just, at a certain point, said, I really want to make something that is accessible to, my mom and her friends. And so, once I kind of made that decision, then I started thinking about, okay, well, and it's going to be a documentary. And, within the documentary genre, there's certain places you can go for money. And, I don't want to try to make something that's, splashy and commercial, which is really hard to do for docs anyway, And so, the natural fit was, to go to, there's a funding arm called ITVS, which is through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It's not actually officially PBS, but it's literally like, I don't know if this is actually true, but I think almost the only significant public funding for film in the United States. So, I mean, I was just so thrilled to get some money from them. And that was kind of always like I knew, I've got to try to do it this way, unless, I can find somebody who just really believes in the movie. And, I've actually met people, who managed to do that. But I think there's a real art form to, being able to pitch people, even at nonprofits, or not foundations, on your ideas. And that's what's so beautiful about, ITVS is that it's a peer-reviewed funding initiative. And so, there's no, like, specific gatekeeper. And, they just, you have to have made a film already, either as, producer or director. Or for me, I brought on some, consulting producers to sort of make sure that they knew that at least I wasn't flying, like, kamikaze mission, which it kind of was. But
But it didn't look like it on paper.
yeah, and then I think it helped that I had edited, features that, had played theatrically and played on HBO and, played on PBS, like, on their initiatives. So that was also helpful. So, but, if you want to make, like, a narrative film, then it's like a whole other ball of wax, and I'm very curious about that, actually. But the whole process of raising money for a narrative seemed really daunting to me, just given the, like, what I knew at that point in my career. And that's part of why I chose to make a documentary, is I felt like I could,
And
so.
it fit what the goals of this project were.
Yeah, and it's just what I needed to do, I guess. I'm glad that I did it now and that it's over.
Although you did borrow from the language and technique of narrative filmmaking and inserted that, and I think that's one of the real strengths of your film, is that there's this really nice back and forth between personal essayistic and then these recreations and these other moments. So
Thanks. Yeah, that's one thing that was also really cool about working with ITVS, is that, they don't really, in my grant I wrote that I was going to do that, but they don't really, they don't have any creative control over your film. Whereas if you have even just, a benefactor, they may or may not want to be involved, because they may, want to be on the private jet as your executive producer or whatever, So that was pretty cool, and I was like, I want to shoot these things on 16mm film, you know, crazy, blah blah blah, and they're like, okay, how much is it gonna cost?
Yeah.
You
We
know?
just write the checks.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool, and I felt like I wanted to do that because I am sort of like a frustrated narrative filmmaker in a way. Like after working on all these docs and stuff, you know, like that's something that I really hope to get to do someday. And so it's like, well, I can just do a little narrative in there. No big deal.
Do you feel like on the from the perspective of an editor, there's what do you think are the differences between editing narrative and editing documentary? Maybe in terms of process, like when you get the footage and things like that, but in terms of, you know, technically and then creating a story and things like that, do you feel like there's massive differences?
I think so, but I do think that, and I haven't tested this yet, they're slightly different skill sets, but I think that, you know, fundamentally, learning to edit in documentary makes you a stronger storyteller because, you know, in these, you know, within the narrative genre, you know, you're usually working with a script. I mean, I guess if you're doing sort of like a more improvised narrative, then you're almost getting closer to like the genre of documentary when it comes to, you know, really bringing out the best in the material. But I think that, you know, within, like if you've edited a bunch of documentaries and then you go to edit a narrative, you're going to have kind of the approach of really making the most of the material. Or maybe everyone's going to try to do that, but there's like a certain practiced quality to finding the story in documentary and looking for, you know, magic that I think, you know, if you always edit narratives, you're just, maybe that's part of the reason why editors, you know, are sometimes overlooked in the processes. You know, in the beginning, it was almost like you're, you know, if you're editing a Hitchcock movie, you know, you look at the storyboard and you need to be able to choose good acting and, you know.
You're gluing the parts together, basically.
Exactly. And, you know, I think that, you know, when you edit a bunch of documentaries, you're really mining the material. And I think that, you know, especially with a lot of the ways that people approach narrative now, you know, that's just useful in any genre. But then when it comes to actually finishing a film, like a friend of mine, this Karen Schmier, who edited like The Fog of War, and you know, now she's been sort of in all this stuff for Errol Morris. And after doing all these docs, she's starting to edit narratives, and even just finishing out like one of those really high-profile docs like that, where you need to make a film print, and you know, there are all these technical things that you have to know. I think a lot of documentary filmmakers, you know, like myself included, I wouldn't really know like how to deliver, you know, all of the things to put something in wide distribution. But I think you can always hire people to help you figure that part out. You know, the most important thing, the core of everything, you know, isn't the technical stuff. It's really being able to find that story, you know. But that being said, you know, when you're managing material, especially on a big movie, if it's, you know, a narrative that has like several cameras, or a documentary that's been shot over years, or you know, also has, you know, lots and many hours of footage, you know, there's an absolutely essential amount of sort of protocol almost that you have to follow.
If you don't want to lose your mind.
Yeah, and even, you know, just ruin the whole thing.
Right.
Because, you know, if you dismiss like format issues and, you know, what's the best way to bring in material so that you can get it out to the, whatever your final delivery format is going to be.
And you were working in HD from the start? Not the maybe personal home footage, but in terms of editing.
With my film? Pretty much. It was really interesting because I went through a whole process of deciding which format I wanted to shoot in, because in the beginning, with the home movie footage, that was all DV. And then, you know, by the time I actually got money, HD had become available enough that, like, I was sort of at the cheaply available enough that I could afford to shoot it, and storage was, you know, actually beginning to become affordable. And so I had to figure out, like, well, how am I going to edit all of these different formats in the same timeline? Because then I also shot some Super 16 millimeter and had it transferred to 1080 HD, and then, you know, the HD that I wound up shooting was DVC Pro HD 720, and so I had 720p in my timeline, and then, you know, this 1080 stuff, which I wound up doing SD down converts of, you know, the DV stuff, some Super 8 that was transferred this way and that way, and, you know, it just turned into like this crazy hodgepodge of formats. And, you know, that's something that happens a lot on docs these days, I think, because people are bringing in all this different stuff. And I forgot what your question was, though.
No, you answered it. I was just thinking about the working process, because you did start 10 years ago, and now HD is kind of, you know.
It's a mess. But I mean, the one thing I was going to say is that, you know, if I would not have been an editor, you know, I've worked with directors, and, you know, even after doing this, you know, I've gone back to editing some for people. It's like a deer in the headlights sometimes if you don't have that knowledge, and it always really fascinates me, like, you know, making these, or producers sometimes will make these huge decisions about format and, you know, approach, and
Without thinking of the ramifications.
or without really knowing.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think that that's like one of the most valuable things that an editor should be able to provide and can provide to a situation like that. Because, you know, producers have their own skill set. It's nice if they, you know about all that stuff. But, you know, if they don't, it's like vital that someone includes the editor, and that they hire an editor who knows this stuff.
Right.
And it's always changing, you know. So like on my film, it turned into it was just crazy. Like we had to up-res everything to 1080 so that we could finish the film. And, you know, I wound up building like a color coding system for all the different formats. So like if it came in and it was 2997 DV, because we also had different frame rates. I just don't advise anyone to do this.
But you should like map it out so that everyone could, like, you almost did every single type of format, it sounds like, so that you could have a little handbook, like, for anybody.
Oh, I know. Well, and the one thing that I almost did, but I didn't do, was HDV.
You missed that one.
Yeah, I missed
What about VHS?
Probably had some in there somewhere. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I was like, when I was trying to decide which camera to use, I was like, well, because Margaret had just shot Order of Myths on HDV, and it looked so good, and I was like, maybe I should just get that camera, what was it, the JVC, you know, and then I started talking to like all these post house before I even decided what camera I was going to use to shoot my movie, and they were just like, you don't want to do HDV and, you know, all HD and DV and all these different, just don't do it. Like, okay.
When you're editing, are you thinking about like the final product to help you inform the editing process, or are you allowing, you know, the different frames or what emerges like visually as the content to influence the outcome?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, if you try, or at least this is my feeling, like, you know, trying to impose your preconceived ideas, especially in documentary, on something can really cause you to miss something that might be even better. But, you know, in some of these projects that I've worked on over the years, it's like if there's not a sort of a trail of breadcrumbs or like a map, you know, through the woods, you can just wind up absolutely lost. And, you know, when I was writing the grants and stuff for my film, I wrote this thing and I was sort of like, I won't do that, you know. I'm going to focus on other people, even though I told them it would be personal, or, you know, it's going to be different. It's not going to be like, it's going to be so wild and crazy and different. And, you know, really, I had like mapped out, like, not only in the grants, I had mapped it out, but I also started like breaking it down almost like a script, you know, like into different pieces of like, well, here's what we want to shoot, you know, we're going to shoot this first, and, you know, this is what I'm hoping it'll achieve. And it really surprised me, you know, even though like the whole time I was like, forget about it. I'm forgetting about that all the plans that I made, you know, once the movie was actually finished, it was kind of like, wow, it actually is pretty close to what I described, you know. So, but I don't know. I mean, I think that movies can surprise you, and that it's really important to be open to that. You know, even some of my friends who are narrative filmmakers, like a friend of mine made this movie, and I really felt like it was supposed to take place in 2 cities, and you know, and they shot part of it, you know, in Europe and part of it in the U.S. And I really felt like the part in the U.S. just wasn't very good, you know. And but then the part in Europe was amazing, and you know, I really felt like he should have just at least like interwove them. Like the second half of the movie was all taking place. It was all the Europe stuff. So you had to get through like all the bad stuff to get to the good stuff. And to me, I was just like, you've got to rethink this.
Cut your
this
losses,
script.
yeah.
You know, you've got to like toss the salad and come up with a new movie now, because it's just not going to work. You know, and it was hard for him to do it. He just couldn't do it. And you know, I think that the movie suffered for it. But you know, who knows? Maybe it would have been a short, which won't work when you've got investors. You know, so
Yeah.
it's a fine line.
Yeah.
Could I ask a little bit about the technical aspect of what you used as far as your cameras, what you edited with Avid, Final Cut? I know sometimes as a filmmaker who's just starting out, you're a little intimidated with this, you know, you've got the old school, new school,
Right.
the market's just like, where do I begin?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the first thing I edited on was this software called Media 100.
I remember that.
And then I cut some stuff on Avid and then Final Cut. And honestly, I feel like, you know, they're all the same. Like the only thing that really changes, like now I've been doing some more commercials and that kind of stuff. And, you know, if you're doing lots of effects, then you really have to know your box, you know. But if you're just editing for story, then, you know, you could edit something on Premiere. I mean, Premiere is actually supposed to be as good as anything else now. So there's a really great sort of leveling that's happened between all these different things. And the only thing that you need to think about when you're choosing like a platform, I think, is whether or not you can generate a list, like an EDL, from this platform, you know, and then also just maybe think about which post house you would want to work with, and see what they think about, you know, the platform that you're thinking about using, because, you know, some places you can just open the thing up in, you know, Final Cut, and they'll color correct it right there. Final Cut has a pretty good color correcting software, and you know, you can output there. Time to go. Sorry.
No, don't apologize. There's just a lot of good things to talk about. Karen will be around for the whole weekend, so I'm sure you have more detailed questions, so you should pick her brain and come see her film Sunday afternoon and her shorts on Sunday evening. Thank you, and stick around for the next panel.